Okay, we're starting up again. It's 2:14. Unfortunately, we do not have a quorum, so we have a shorter agenda. We're going back to brief program activity updates for public comment. This is a brief reminder that all public comments at this time should be relevant to this agenda item and directed to the board members. Are there any public comments on this agenda item?
To the chair, this is Justin Eve. I was wondering, what item number were you on? I missed that.
Number 7. We already had a presentation and we already had the board chime in, so now we're just having public comments on that item. Do we have any public comments?
We can't comment on the.
No, go ahead if you want. I mean, we already did, but go ahead. Oh,
Yeah.
yes. Go ahead, Justin, if you'd like to represent something.
Well, I mean, I think the big question is around program activities specific to the implementation of the state plan and how that's being implemented in the emergency regs around that. So we're just trying to understand the implementation process around the program activities specific to the implementation of the state plan. I think is a big thing that we hear from our members at the Hemp Farmers Guild, about that process. So I guess a specific comment is, we would like to be involved with that process, but the question specifically is, where are you guys at with that process as far as program activities? And is there a way that we could become more involved with the rollout of the state plan and implementation from a regulatory standpoint?
Good question.
Yeah. So Justin, as was stated earlier, so the excuse me, the regulations were proposed to be changed in accordance with the approved state plan that was proposed via emergency regulation. As you noted, the emergency proposal has been withdrawn at the request of the Office of Administrative Law. They requested some changes for clarity, nothing related to, again, program administration, but related to clarity, and requested some edits. And so that will be reproposed and reposted once again, and we'll start that process all over again. So again, that's in order to implement the plan as approved. As far as the board's role, that's what we were doing today, which is engaging with the board and determining changes that can be made to the regulations to continue to improve. And so that's the role that you and Jack have taken on. We appreciate your efforts there, and we've got a couple of motions to work with thus far from your efforts in making additional changes to those regulations as we move through this process. So if we're able to make it through the emergency regulation process, those regulations will take effect. And then that will start the clock to be engaging in the regular rulemaking process, where we will have between 6 months and a year to complete, or 6 months, which can be extended to a year, to complete regular rulemaking and certify and implement those regulations. During that time, we can make amendments. And so again, if the board takes actions during that time, we appreciate the board's recommendations, so that way they can be taken into consideration as part of that regular rulemaking process. Once we are able to make it through that process and are able to actually fully permanently adopt, we say permanently adopt those regulations. Of course, as you all know, regulations are not permanent. They are made to be changed. And so there will continue to be opportunity to work with the board to amend and adopt changes to the regulations beyond that. We know that not only are the items that we've discussed today and whatever else you all are currently working on are going to need to be changed, but there are changes that we aren't even aware of today that are going to need to be made down the line. So we're aware that that's going to continue, but that's where we're at right now, is that the emergency regulation will be resubmitted hopefully soon, and we'll be continuing to move forward in that process and trying to implement the approved state plan to ensure that we're compliant with federal laws and regulations. Again, keeping in mind that we will continue to work with you all and continue to seek to make changes and make improvements to the regulation.
Thank you for that. And I guess two questions come up around that. First question is there a way that the board could have oversight or see these proposed regulations before they get submitted to OAL or before they get proposed as emergency regs for our review and oversight as expertise, on the board, to kind of say, hey, this looks good, or maybe needs more work before then being rolled out? Is that a possible process that we could have some oversight on that language?
I mean, at this point, the board has already seen everything that will be proposed. It's already been put out there. Again, we are making some changes for clarity. We're not making any changes related to actual program administration. And so the board has already seen everything that will be proposed. Again, we're making changes for clarity based off the Office of Administrative Law's recommendations. Just to a point of clarification for their role, Office of Administrative Law regulates the regulators. So they regulate agencies and ensure that we are meeting the statutory requirements. So when we adopt regulations, we're required to follow the Administrative Procedure Act. And so OAL oversees our implementation of that act and make sure that we're following that act. They also make sure that we have the appropriate and relevant statutory authority to adopt those regulations. And that's where their role comes in. And so they've decided that as part of the Administrative Procedure Act, one of the requirements there is clarity, and they required some additional changes to ensure that we are meeting that clarity standard that's in the APA.
Understood. Thank you for the clarity there.
Yeah.
And I guess for instance, the question is that, if as the department and staff that you're going to be putting forth emergency regs, is there a portion, whether it's in the committee with rules and regs, that we could review that information before actually being proposed into the public?
At this point, there are no plans for any additional emergency regulations. Again, going through an emergency process for this particular regulation is necessary to ensure compliance with federal laws and regulations and making sure that we are meeting the requirements that took effect January 1st. So at this point, there are no additional plans. The additional changes to regulations are what we discussed and what there were motions on earlier today, which are proposals from the board. And CDFA does not have any planned changes beyond that. Again, our goal is to ensure federal compliance and then to work with the board to continue to administer and refine and evolve the program into what it needs to be to ensure that it can be administered consistently.
So it sounds like then it would be safe to say that whatever's in the state plan, expect those regulations to be put forth in the future. And then the other side of that is, since they're emergency regulations, when do we become more permanent, or what's the process to have these codified where they are permanent, where it's not a continual emergency reg. What is that process? And I know you said 6 to 8 months, but when does 6 to 8 months start to codifying that? So just trying to understand, when it moves away from emergencies into actually a codified program.
Yeah. So Justin, we've provided before, but we can certainly provide you with the timelines. Office of Administrative Law has the full procedure and the timelines that are a part of that process, and we can provide that information. And so offhand, I don't recall exactly when the time frame starts, but as part of the emergency regulation process, the department has 6 months to go through regular rulemaking and make permanent those regulations. However, the department can request up to 2 3-month extensions on that, so the process can take up to a year.
And where are we at today? Like, did that 6 months
Has not
start?
started.
Okay, so and it would start when?
I don't recall. It would either be at the point at which it's posted or at the point at which it takes effect. I don't recall which one.
Once the emergency regs are
yes.
posted, then it moves towards a permanent regulation?
I would have to check to see when that 6-month clock starts.
Could we request as the board, if everyone's open to this, to request the timeline on that, get some details back from staff?
Yeah, again,
about exactly when
we've
that will-
provided that before. There is the Office of Administrative Law has a chart that it outlines the full emergency regulation process, and we're happy to provide you with that information, provide you with that link.
But specific to, I understand their process, but where are we actually at as a program? Like, if I ask you, when does the 6 months start? That's what I'm looking for.
I would have to look at that because I would have to know whether that starts when we propose that regulation or when we post it for comment or when it takes effect. My guess is it's probably when it takes effect, but I don't know offhand. So we'd have to check on that timeline again, that's going to outline those requirements. And so then if we actually looked at the timeline that's posted on the Office of Administrative Law website, we would be able to say, okay, here's when we posted, here's when that regulation took effect, therefore here's when the 6-month time frame starts. But I would need that in front of me to be able to specifically answer which of those dates would be applicable there.
I think that would be great, for us to understand kind of where we're at in the process. And are we still subject to emergency regulations beyond that point? Or then at that point, there will be no more emergency regs?
Generally speaking, we don't like doing emergency regulations. They are done when there is an emergency need. The only time you do an emergency regulations is when there is an emergency, when there is a significant impact, and we don't have time to go through the full rulemaking process in order to mitigate that impact. This department does a lot of emergency regulations because we often do them in response to things like pest fines, where we can't wait a year after a pest fine to take action. So we maybe have a little bit more experience with that than other agencies, but we only do that when there is an actual emergency situation. And so ideally, no, we would not be moving forward with any emergency regulations from here on forward. And again, ideally, we'll be working with the board to make recommendations on additional changes that need to be made proactively. So that way we can continue to adjust and make changes to the regulation in advance of there being that kind of an emergency need. We're not aware of anything that would require an emergency at this point. But then again, we weren't aware of anything that would require an emergency previously either. So I don't foresee that. And I think if the board is continuing to evaluate the regulations and make recommendations and working proactively, I would not expect there to be a need for emergency regulations moving forward unless there's something that the board identifies that really is truly an emergency need and a major gap that needs to be filled immediately, and we don't have time and we've got adequate justification to not go through that full process.
And if an emergency is deemed, whether it's by the department, staff, or the board, is that then defined and then stated, hey, this is the emergency and we need to figure out language around that?
So the emergency is defined in the finding of emergency. It's one of the documents that was posted that has been pulled back and will be posted again with the regulation. And so that is explained, and the standards are also explained in that document as well.
And just from the board standpoint, if we see that there's an emergency that needs to be addressed, what's the process to propose that? Hey, we just come to the board, we send an email saying this is an emergency, we need to address this?
I'm not familiar with that situation coming up, so I would suspect that it's probably not very likely, but if there's something that the board's discussing and it feels like we don't, for some reason, have time to go through the full process, we would have to be able to identify and justify that. If there's something that you can think of in particular that you want to discuss, we can, but I'm not aware of anything that, again, considering the time frame that it takes to set up board meetings, all the public meeting notice requirements there, that often will have impacts there. So yeah, I mean, I'm not familiar with anything, but I suppose there could be situations where that would come up.
Hello, this is Vanessa. I have a question, and I think it's just to kind of piggyback on what Justin is saying. I think that his questions, and please correct me if I'm wrong, Justin, and my questions is more of, and you're explaining, Josh, right now why an emergency. It just seems to, at least to me, that the emergencies have happened often. And what can we do as a board to assist or to be aware of it? I imagine something happens and that triggers the emergency, to call the emergency act. And why not at that point to let us know if you need some feedback? I think at this point, we just want to have some feedback as well. We are the ones living, as a farmer, for instance, I'm the one living, and my colleagues living all those regulations and all those emergencies. And until I was at this meeting, I found out that the emergency had been withdrawn. So those are the type of things that I would like to know through you and know in a meeting.
Sorry, Vanessa, it sounded like you cut off.
No, I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you, Vanessa.
Yeah, I think, we don't foresee that being typical. Emergency regulations are not common, but they are occasionally used. Usually it's at the direction of the legislature when they're used at the start of a program, but they have been used at the start of programs in other situations. For instance, cannabis, their regulations, I believe, were adopted by emergency initially. That's not uncommon. But again, moving forward, there certainly is no intention of adopting any regulations via emergency. And the intent and the structure of the program in law is to have the board discuss and provide recommendations for changes moving forward. And so we would seek recommendations from the board and attempt to hopefully work proactively before we end up in a situation where an emergency regulation is necessary.
If I may, I don't want to beat a dead horse. So I think what maybe I feel in common with Justin and Vanessa is only that the board, we are your appointed panel of experts, and we want to be collaborative with you, and we want to be able to assist you in rulemaking and regulation crafting, and that perhaps, although you've now said that the emergency findings are for a specific reason, in this case, to ensure that the state plan is followed for this current cultivation season that's coming up, we only feel a little bit of concern that maybe these emergency findings keep feeling like maybe they're almost circumventing us somehow, and I think that's the concern that's generally being expressed. That would be, that's not the case, is what you're saying, which is good. Appreciate that. And we're all just trying to say we want to collaborate. We are your appointed body of experts. We don't know regulations very well like you guys, but we know hemp very well. So let us please help you craft regulations about hemp. I think that's the spirit of what's going on here.
Yes, and I would like just to add as well that it would be very helpful that if there are emergency regulations that can be dropped on Monday, Tuesday, rather than on a Friday, that would be also give us opportunity to get back to you or for the public in general to get
Absolutely.
back to the TDFA.
That's the great point, Vanessa. Yeah, the 5-day comment window starting on a Friday is difficult.
And is that window, just to follow up on that, Jack? Are those business days or those days of the calendar days? Could we get a definition on whether those are calendar days or business days? Because you give us 30 days, and if there are 20 of those are actual days.
Believe it's calendar days. We would again have to check with the Office of Administrative Law website. And staff don't choose what day the regulations are going to drop. For regular rulemaking, they actually normally do drop on a Friday. That's the normal Office of Administrative Law calendars that the proposed regulations normally do come out on a Friday, and then the deadline ends up being a Monday that's 6 weeks later. That's just the way that normally works. I'm not sure about emergency regulations and how that works, and if there is any flexibility on that and when they get posted. But that's something we can look into and take into consideration. Certainly appreciate the thoughts of having a regulation be proposed and then having part of the comment period be over a weekend.
Could we request maybe a document about that, or if you've sent it before, if you could just resend us those parameters around those specific requests?
We'll go ahead and make sure that everyone gets a copy of the links to the appropriate documents on the Office of Administrative Law website. Again, we've presented those and provided them in the past. We'll make sure that everybody gets a copy of them.
Yeah, and if we could also
Sure.
request that we define whether those are calendar days or business days.
It would say on those documents.
Perfect. So yeah, if we could just get that information that leads to that. And then another question from some of our constituents, we're wondering back to, just to relate this to like harvest definition, we're looking for, what defines an emergency. So I don't know if you have a place, maybe the OAL in the same document will state, what the definition of an emergency is. So at least if we recommend or if we see something that we think could be an emergency, if that is truly an emergency, if there's different process. So if we could request as a board to get that definition as well, what is or constitutes an emergency by definition, so we could then
Right. So that would also be the same Office of Administrative Law website that would provide that sort of information. And it's also outlined in the finding of emergency that gets posted with the proposed regulation. So that would be in that document itself, which again, there was one that was posted recently. There will be another one posted when that gets reposted again, and we start that process again. So that gets outlined as far as why it is an emergency, what constitutes that emergency.
Of course, and maybe, I know you guys have the hundreds of, all this stuff that you have constantly dealing with through outreach, but if you could, clearly, take an excerpt and say, this is where that definition of emergency is coming from, something like that. That would be great to not, I spend a decent amount of time on the computer and try to stay away from as much as possible. So, any help of kind of weeding through some of those links and documents, you guys probably find it a lot faster than I would. And
we have we do have a link here, and they actually do a really good job of having bold questions exactly like you're asking, and they break it down, and then they have links to like timelines and more interactive. So we can send you that link, and I think that should answer all of your questions as far as the process. And it is calendar days rather than business days or whatever we call them.
Perfect. And then is that something that's posted on the Industrial Hemp website at all? Is there a place for OAL? Like if people were looking for that, is that on our site? And could we, is there a place or could we put a place for administrative procedures and things like that on the program?
Yeah, I mean, I don't believe it currently is, but we can add that we've got a section for quick links that we could add links to the Office of Administrative Law, just like we do for other relevant agencies. Yeah.
That would be great. Thank you. And I'm just a couple brief more questions specific to the emergency here. We're wondering if, I don't know if the CDFA legal department or counsel from CDFA, could specifically explain, and maybe that's part of what you're saying, but specific to the last batch of emergency regs that were dropped and then rescinded, I don't know if there's an explanation of, emergency status, why that's an emergency status. I don't know if it's a legal recommendation or OAL stating this is why it's an emergency. But
that's all in the finding of emergency.
Perfect. And then we'll get that. And then other question here would be, obviously the timing is difficult to drop a regulation like right before the season starts or right in the middle of the season or right before harvest. We would really love to see, if we say, hey, we're implementing this state plan, we expect that this portion of the state plan will be implemented by, March, and this part will be implemented by June, and this, because for us as an industry, we and regulators, for Lisa's office and others, they have to scramble last minute if it's like right in the middle, previous to harvest or previous to planting. So, I don't know if that's something that's planned out, as far as implementation. I know you kind of said we're working through that, but it would be great to see timing wise, the implementation process of the state plan and where the expectation is going to be of when, like if I said, when is this subsection or section of the state plan going to be implemented? It'd be amazing to be able to get that. So at least we could all prepare for what is coming. And so I don't know if that's even possible to make that request, but a timeline on implementation of such emergency regs or such state plan.
So, Justin, I'll say that you're kind of veering into recommendations by the board at this point, and without a quorum, we want to try to avoid that. But I will say that if you've got recommendations, especially as we're talking moving forward about changes to regulation, if you and Jack or even the board as a whole, when you discuss those, if you have recommendations as far as actual timeline of implementation, making sure that, say, being implemented in between seasons, things like that, that should also be part of your recommendation. Because that is absolutely a valid point of ensuring that those, that we're not implementing something, again, a major change that changes how somebody's growing a crop right in the middle of when they already have plants in the ground. We definitely appreciate that. And so that's definitely something I would recommend you all, as you're moving forward, do take into consideration. But as far as the existing plan, there won't be any changes to what gets posted from what there is. And as far as making any additional recommendations from the board right now, I would recommend against it, again, just because we do not currently have a quorum. We want to make sure that we're being cognizant of that while still taking advantage of being able to get conversation and some feedback and get some information out there while we're all together.
So the difference, so if I'm not making a recommendation, but sure, could I make a request if you have that to provide the timeline to us of implementation of regs?
At this point, we don't have any information. Yeah, and anything that you see posted, it is what it is. So whatever again, there will be some edits to the finding of emergency and the regulation for the sake of clarity. But otherwise, what you saw, that's what it is. And so if what you're looking for is there, it's there. And if it's not, it's not at this point.
Okay, I think you covered it. I really appreciate the clarity. Thank you.
I've got one quick question, Josh. Just regarding, and you may have already explained this and it went over my head, but regarding the essentially the timeline of these emergency regulations. So, and I understand this a little bit in local law from counties, and so I have an idea of maybe how it works on the county level, but I'm wondering how it works on the state level. And emergency finding is made, emergency regulations are enacted, and those regulations have a date of expiration automatically, correct? So those emergency regulations will vanish at a certain point in time, maybe 1 year. I don't really care exactly what the time is right now. At the same time as these emergency regulations are enacted, the regular rulemaking process also starts at the same time, or it could start at any time. It needs to be finished. In theory, it needs to be finished by the time the emergency regulations expire, but it doesn't necessarily start immediately. So the regular rulemaking process in regards to these issues hasn't started yet. It will start sometime in the future, with the goal of them being finished by the time the emergency regs expire. Okay. How long do emergency?
correct.
Thank you. How long do emergency regs last?
So emergency regulations, my understanding, and staff can correct me if I'm wrong, I believe it's 6 months, and then they can be extended twice for 3-month periods each time. And so technically they can be in place for up to a year.
Okay.
And we have to complete the regular rulemaking and certification process within that year.
Thank you.
And just to confirm, after the year sunsets, then you could technically request more time as staff or department? No, it'd have
That
to be.
emergency is gone.
It is gone, okay.
And so if the regular rules are not in place by then, it's all gone. It's all vanishes.
And then we just. And then if it vanishes, then we just go back to what was prior?
You'd have to be, it's imperative that they finish the regular process before the emergency ones end. If they did not finish the regular process, the emergency rules all just vanish, and so you would be left with what was before that.
Yeah.
And
And
then
in this case, they would then be in violation, which is the thing they're trying to avoid in this emergency. And so it's truly imperative that they do finish them. So they will finish them, I believe, but it's not a case where they actually might not finish them. But in the case, if somehow they did not finish them, there would be no rules. The rules would be.
That's correct, Jack. And just a reminder, please speak into your mic. Appreciate it. But yes, that's correct, Jack. It would
Sorry
be
about that.
imperative. No worries. It would be imperative that we would complete it within that time frame. Absolutely.
And then my last just piece on that would be, assuming that because there's been a large set of emergency regs, that have come out over the years, are any of these regs set to sunset that aren't already replaced? Or it seems like you guys have been pretty diligent on implementing permanent after. Okay, so thank you.
Do we have any public comments on this agenda item? Number 7, it's the brief program activities update.
Are we considering emergency regulations discussion part of that?
Well, we were going to keep it at the end, but it looks like we already talked.
So Wayne Richmond made a comment that there has never been such an emergency and that OAL has never appeared before the board. And there's no other comments.
Okay, moving on. Let's have public comments on matters not on the agenda. Are there any public comment matters not on the agenda?
So Wayne does have his hand raised. Wayne, I've asked to unmute yourself.
Am I to understand, Richard, that, Wayne Richmond, California Hemp Association President, I'm sorry. Am I to understand that we're foregoing any other reports on rules and regs or legislative updates, and we're running straight to the end of this meeting?
It sounds like it, Wayne.
And is that because those require a vote and that I'm not aware of, and therefore a quorum is the reason we're closing it, or time constraints, or at your will? What's the deal here?
It's not at my will, Wayne. We do not have a quorum, so we only could discuss certain items on the agenda. And this is the next item on the agenda.
So just to be clear, without the presence of a quorum, a deliberative body cannot transact business other than to fix the time to which adjourn, or recess the meeting, or take measures to obtain quorum. So this is to remain within that requirement of the public Bagley-Keene Open Meeting Act.
So does that include any discussion regardless of whether there's a vote or not?
Yes, that does include that includes discussions on transacting business of the board. Correct.
How unfortunate. Okay, thank you.
Would that allow that any member of the public, since essentially those items have now come off the agenda, can any member of the public start discussion about them in this forum now?
So items on the agenda will move to the next meeting, and we will discuss those agenda items at this time. And so we can pretty much only take comments on items that are not on the agenda at this time, and you guys can take those comments, and then everything else is going to be moved to the next meeting. It will basically be a continuation of this meeting. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
And just to maybe create some clarity for those participating, not only here on the board, but also online, could we maybe staff could state item or agenda item, to be moved, agenda item number to be moved, so at least they know if they're following along on their agenda, hey, this is getting moved. Thank you.
Yes, appreciate that, Justin. It's a
Yeah,
good
thanks,
suggestion.
Justin. So agenda items 8, 9, and 10 are going to be moved. It is noted that agenda item 10 does have additional attachments, and those are available online and can be viewed there as well. We did address agenda item number 12 here, but it sounds like it will also be discussed again potentially later. And then that is it, unless I'm missing something. Okay. You can, well, 14? Next meeting date. Next meeting date.
I have a question. This is Kevin Johnson. And
We can hear you.
so, can you hear me fine?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, great. I do have some information, but on the legislative updates, but it looks like I'm not going to be on the next on the board during the next meeting. Would I be able to present this information that I have as a public audience member?
Yeah, this is Josh, Kevin. That should be fine. I don't see why not, but we'll confirm ahead of the next meeting, just in case you're no longer a member, to make sure that it's okay, as long as the chair would approve continuing with that report and providing that report at the next board meeting. I personally don't see any issues with that. We will confirm, but to me, it sounds like it would just be a chair decision.
Kevin, this is Jack. What do you know the precise date that your registration expires, therefore disqualifying you from the board? Because our quorum seems like it's kind of razor thin, and maybe we should consider.
It's June 4th.
June 4th. Okay, so that's clearly far too soon for you to be
Yeah.
a member of the next meeting. Okay, thanks.
Okay, for our next meeting, we're looking at the end of July. How about a Tuesday, July 26th?
That's that's 11 weeks or so.
Something like that.
Could we propose, we're in the early May, so, could we come back? Since there's some of these items specific, those fees were something that we really wanted to address. I'd like to see us come back before the end of June at the latest. It really needs to happen sooner. I believe that a good number of people in the hemp industry, not just the farmers, will be greatly affected and want to know some answers about those fees from the California Department of Public Health. So if we could, look at sometime before the end of June and, stick to, even maybe less than 6 weeks now since we didn't get through the whole meeting?
So yeah, we could do beginning of June.
Sure, sounds good to me.
June.
Okay.
And pick a Tuesday, maybe June 5th.
Well, June 5th.
Good job. Fucking 11 weeks, man.
How about June 8th?
Friday.
It's a Wednesday?
That's a Friday.
Really? I got it wrong.
Yep, you're right. It's a
I
Wednesday.
got a wrong
You're
calendar
right.
then.
You're right.
Does that sound okay? And why don't we meet at 9 o'clock? What about June 15th, Lisa? Out of town that day.
Why not Thursdays like we've been doing?
Well, actually, we did Tuesday for 4 years, and then we switched to Thursday.
So,
And some
Richard,
people are
in the
asking
interest
to
of
go back
time,
to Tuesday, so.
yeah, Richard, and in the interest of time, because we do want to make sure if you all want to meet in person again, we'll need to make sure the auditorium is available as well. So what we can do is people can reach out and find dates the auditorium is available, and we can do a doodle poll to see, and whatever date the most board members, whatever dates we have that we have a quorum, we'll do the soonest available of those, and we'll just move forward that way, and we'll get that notice sent out as soon as we can. So just let board members know we would do a pretty tight turnaround on that doodle poll just to make sure we can get room reserved and set up. So whenever we're ready and you receive that message, please reply quickly so we can get the room reserved. But if that would be acceptable to everybody.
I'm acceptable with that as long as everybody's willing to promptly fill out the doodle poll. I don't understand what the delays are in getting those back. There shouldn't be more than 24 to 48 hours that everybody can determine that, I would think. So,
I agree, Rob.
The only thing
Josh?
to the chair, if I could, Justin Eve here. I guess maybe, the doodle poll to finalize the date, but maybe if we could just, sounds like the second week in June, third week in June. So if everyone on the board and staff could look into the second and third week in June, try to focus in on those couple weeks and see what works for everyone.
I believe Lisa said she's not available the second week, so then it would be.
Not available the 8th or the 15th, maybe the 22nd, if you're looking at Wednesdays. I don't know.
Hello, this is Emma Aronson. May I speak for a moment?
Sure.
I will be back in California by June 24th. It's possibly a little bit sooner, but so I request that we meet after June 24th.
Okay, because it sounds like we'll end up doing the doodle poll and we'll have some dates to pick from.
Doodle poll sounds like the.
yeah, and I would request we try to keep it in June because first week of July I'm out, and then that's going to start pushing us into the second week of July. So,
It sounds like then to the chair that, as long as we can get it done before the end of June, as soon as possible in June.
Yes, sounds good.
And to the chair, we do want to maybe add some agenda items for the next meeting before you adjourn. And I don't know if you went to public comment too before close.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we did go to public comment. There weren't any besides Wayne's comments. Yeah, at this point, as far as additional agenda items, yeah, it may be best if you just simply provide, if you've got a recommended agenda item, just providing that directly to the chair for consideration. I think that'll be the easier way, just to make sure we don't have any bag leaking violations.
And do that in email,
Yeah, you
separate
can
outside
just-
of the meeting.
Yeah, just send it, directly.
Understood. Thank you.
Yep.
Well, it sounds like we're going to adjourn, and the time is 2:53 for adjournment. Thank you, everybody, for coming.
Thank you.
Record.
Well, good seeing you in person, Josh. It's been a while.